Hey everybody. Like I said, I'm Rich Campbell. I'm a greenhouse manager at Meadow Landscapes. I've been with MNL for 8 years, I think. Mostly working in the greenhouse. I've spent some time working in the seed production division, and I've spent some time in the habitat stewardship division too, where we're maintaining existing prairies and ecosystems. Before that, like we mentioned, I worked with Thomsen's Garden Center. And before that, I grew up working with my dad, who has a landscaping company. So I've kind of always been doing the plants and the landscapes and all this stuff, yeah. Like we mentioned, we got 2 hours, and I can't talk about this for 2 hours by myself. So if you guys have any questions or comments or tidbits or whatever, please do interact, yeah. Let's get ripping. So, just a little synopsis of what MNL is. We're a habitat restoration company. We've got our services division located out of Otsego. That's between Albertville and Monticello. You can see us off the highway with the buffalo. That's us. And that's where we're hosting this side of the company. So we have our construction division who does the installation. They're installing acres of prairies, tens of thousands of acres of prairie, doing a lot of work with under solar panels. And incorporated with that is the grazing program, in which case we're raising sheep and they are mowing under these solar panels, which is a really fun relationship. Now you have the sheep and the native plants and the solar energy, and you're eliminating a lot of the mechanical process, fumes and all that. The sheep are fueling the soil, which is fueling the plants. The plants studies are showing that they're helped to shade out the solar panels to making those more efficient. And it's a fun little relationship there. We've got our Red Rock Fire Division. These are the folks that are doing the prescribed burns, which is a necessary and natural part of prairie ecosystem management. Outside of the burn season in Minnesota, which is spring and autumn, they're assisting across the country with fire mitigation, going out west, going all sorts of places as they're needed. And then we have the professional services and veg management. That's where I started with MNL. And these are the folks who are on site maintaining these job sites. We'll talk about this, but doing these native restorations is a process. It takes some nurturing for many years, several years. You're going to see the ecosystem change and evolve through that time. You're going to be selecting against undesirable invasive weeds and trying to promote the native plants, and these are the folks out there doing that. I am with the products division, which consists of the seed production and the plant production. My farm is located in Foley, Minnesota. That's between St. Cloud and Princeton. It's on about 300 acres of native seed production. Think row crops, but it's not corn and soy. It's wildflowers and grasses and all that. And that's also the site where my greenhouses exist. We have 5 greenhouses right now. I think it's 27,000 square feet of greenhouse space, which sounds like a lot, but it's pretty small compared to where you're looking today. Yeah, talking a little bit about that process, we're going to talk about remnant prairies as we get into this. And these are the last remaining natural prairie ecosystems that have not been disturbed, they've not been tilled, they've not been converted to agriculture or housing or what have you. Doing this process of native plant seed production, first we are collecting seed from these sites with all sorts of regulation, through the DNR and so on. And we are then propagating that seed into plants like this, which are then going to create fields like this. From there, we're then harvesting seed, which gets bagged into stuff like this, which is both, available as a retail product, but it's also what goes into restoring these tens of thousands of acres of prairie and other habitat. And that seed also goes into creating these plants from our greenhouse. So with that, we're maintaining local ecotypes, which we'll talk more about what all that means as well. We produce hundreds of species. Some are more popular than others. And MNL and Thomsen can help you decide what's right for you. And basically what I'm saying here is many of our species are really best suited for an expansive prairie or a wetland or deep in the woods, not necessarily for your garden or your landscape. But there are many that are very successful in that application, and those are the ones that Michelle and I are curating for Thomsen's. Some examples of some native plants that you might be familiar with, maybe perhaps not in name, but maybe you've seen them. Black-eyed Susan, little blue stem, purple coneflower, butterfly milkweed, and Meadow Blazing Star. We'll talk a lot about those two. We'll talk a lot about black-eyed Susan. We're going to talk about all these. Some other examples, purple prairie clover, bergamot, lupin, prairie smoke, coneflower. And one of the things I'm trying to emphasize here is these plants are beautiful. They're not just weeds. They have as much beauty and value in that sense as some of the things you might be more familiar with gardening with. So, where does native wildlife thrive? We've got some examples here of what Minnesota basically looks like today. We've got highway medians and our gardens. We've got lake shores. We've got residential areas. We have agriculture. It's kind of a trick question. Here along the highway, we have invasive species. This is kind of a bummer if you didn't already know, but 95% of the stuff you see day to day is not likely a Minnesota native plant. All this stuff growing along the highway that you're so familiar with, and you see it and you think Minnesota, these are invasive species. They came over from Asia, Africa, Europe, and we'll talk about this all day today, but it's problematic in that these species have not co-evolved with our insects and our local animals, and thus they're not a successful habitat or a successful food source. In our gardens, we have non-native and pest-free plants. All through this presentation, I want to emphasize that I love gardening with exotic and showy cultivar plants. I am in no way, neither of us, trying to advocate to remove your gardens or to not enjoy the plants that you've enjoyed. We're just trying to demonstrate this other kind of garden that can exist alongside the plantings you're used to, and what you'll be missing out on by not incorporating native plants into your landscape. On our shoreline, here we have a hostile shoreline, something you've likely seen, solid riprap, boulders. It's no vegetation, there's no habitat. This is problematic for pollinators and land-dwelling animals. It's also problematic for fish and aquatic organisms that need that vegetation to reproduce and have a food source and have a dwelling and all this. We'll talk more about this as well. Here, this suburban neighborhood, we call this a turf desert. It's endless turf. That's a single species. That's nothing but grass. That grass isn't habitat for anything. It's not blooming. It's not producing nectar and pollen. The vegetative material itself isn't nutritious to any of our native organisms. Japanese beetles love it. So if you don't like those guys, you hear what I'm saying? And what is this turf? It's a now American tradition that stems back from European colonists, right? In Ireland, in England, the turf grass is the native species. That's what that habitat looked like. That's what evolved with their organisms and their ecosystem. We introduced this here. We displaced our native habitat, and now we're lacking habitat for all of our existing organisms. And here, monoculture and pesticides. Now, farmers are incredibly important to everything we do, right? I have nothing but love for our farmers. Without farmers, we would have no food. We're going to talk today about some practices that farmers do actively practice and should continue to practice, in which we can incorporate native plants with agriculture and actually promote better crop yields. This is where native habitat thrives, right? These are our wetlands, these are prairies, our woods, our shores. This is what Minnesota looked like before those other slides. This is a map offered by the DNR. What you see in yellow is the prairie ecosystem prior to European colonization. These little speckles in red are the last remaining remnant prairies. It's less than 1% of what it used to be. It's said to be the most endangered ecosystem in America. It's problematic, right?
I've heard the world. It's the most endangered ecosystem in the world. It's all that concerned about the Amazon rainforest. There's far more of that left than there is of our native prairies.
Same can be said about our wetlands and our shorelines and these places as well. And truthfully, Minnesota's been hit pretty hard with it. But Minnesota is also a very cool state, and that we acknowledge this, and we're doing things about it. There's all sorts of funding and grant programs and all sorts of stuff like that that we'll talk about to help incentivize and motivate and assist people in bringing these native habitats back to their yard, which is what we're going to have to do. We can no longer expect wildlife to exist in these wild places if there are no wild spaces. So how can we take the places where we live and we enjoy and share that with the other organisms? And why do we care? Well, for one, animal diversity. All these organisms that we've all grown up to know and love. There's a complicated food web that exists. You know, you go back to grade school biology, you've got the birds eating the insects, eating the smaller insects, eating the plants, right? As we eliminate plants, the native plants, from that first level in the food chain, there's then an effect all the way down the line, and that's largely why today we see loss in biodiversity, loss in all sorts of animal populations in general, right? This is way beyond my expertise, but there's a very complicated web of soil biota that's happening. All sorts of interesting studies are happening more and more today. It's kind of like the new, I don't know.
If you want to delve into something that's really going to blow your mind through soil science, it's crazy.
In the soil, all of our plants are communicating with each other through fungal networks. There's bacteria and insects and all sorts of organisms involved in creating this complicated web, just like our food web. It's an exchange of nutrients, an exchange of information, and this is all now highly disturbed, which again is leading to population loss, loss in biodiversity, all that stuff. Root depth. So here we have the root depth of our turf grass, and here we can see the root depth of our native grasses. These are here, they're for one, they're very drought resistant. They're tolerant of everything Minnesota can throw at them. They are what naturally exists here. They will tolerate your winter at its harshest. They'll tolerate your summer at its harshest. They are adapted for this habitat. They are adapted to maintain the soil moisture. Think the Dust Bowl. You know, think the Dust Bowl that might be 10 years from now if you know, our path continues. They're also filtering water, keeping our drinking water clean, keeping the runoff that goes into streams and rivers and lakes and all that clean as well, which again, further down the line affects other ecosystems, other animals. And we're part of that food web as well. Not only are we eating the animals that eat the plants, but 75% of our food is pollinated by insects. So, how can we share our space? Well, in the agriculture setting, we can incorporate hedgerows of native plantings. This has been demonstrated to increase crop yield. By allocating a percentage of your agriculture land to native habitat, you are now harboring pollinators that are going to assist in your crop production. Not only that, in the case of corn, for example, that's soy, but in the case of corn, which is not insect pollinated, you're harboring the predator insects that are going to prey on the pest species. There was a time when we depended a lot less on pesticides, and a lot of that has been lost due to the way we manage our land. These kind of no-man lands, highway medians, along parking lots, all that, it doesn't have to be nothing but invasive species. Organizations like MNL are converting that into habitat restoration. There's the Monarch Highway Corridor that goes all the way from Minnesota down to Texas, a nationwide movement to incorporate these native plantings along our highway system. In our yards, we can incorporate low-growing ground covers in our turf. This plant is pussy toes. It's this one we have here. This one, it's going to get a little flower on it. You're invited to mow around it. But once this thing's established, you can mow over the top of it just like your turf. It's a low-growing ground cover. It's, if we can all just change our thinking and our cultural practices and get away from this idea that your lawn has to be pristine and uniform and sterile, basically, you can incorporate this stuff, and you're gonna enjoy it. Prairie smoke, another super cool native ground cover. You can incorporate this in your lawn. You can mow right over the top of it, set your mower high. This is going to offer habitat where that turf is not. Bee lawn is a pretty popular movement that's taking place, and this is the idea in which you're converting your lawn into, it's mostly a low-grow fescue mix, but it's also enriched with low-growing flowers. Clover, thyme, self-heal. These are all things that have definitely been thought of as weeds in the past. And in some ways, depending on where you're at, you might still think of it as a weed today too. These are species, the thyme and the clover specifically, that are introduced from Asia when we talked about invasive species. I've been on job sites where we're trying to restore a native prairie, and in doing that, we need to eliminate this stuff so that the more beneficial plants can take hold. But in an urban turf setting, this stuff is 100% more valuable than a turf carpet. This was designed to benefit the rusty patch bumblebee, which is one of Minnesota's endangered bumblebee species, and it serves tons of benefits beyond all that as well. These are legumes, this clover, which means it's enriching your soil by helping to assist with the nitrogen cycle. That's eliminating fertilizers. This is stuff that's intended to be yay high and eliminate the constant needless mowing. This is fun stuff. And this self-heal is a native species as well. That's this one here. And you can enhance this with native plugs as well. Our pussy toes, our prairie smoke, violet, tons of cool ones. So it's this idea again of take this spot of turf, which, how often are you really playing on it? And if you are, maintain the turf that you want to maintain. Maintain the spot for your dog, maintain the spot for your kids and for your recreational activities, but you should think about the spots that aren't serving you and convert that into something that can be beneficial for another organism. Yeah, so we're going to talk through this whole presentation about maintenance. And largely what that consists of is putting physical pressure on the plants that you don't want to then assist the ones you do want, because they're all competing for the same resources. So those weeds, for example, maybe I'll back up for a second. To get this installed, this is going to come as a seed mix, right? So the more prep site you allocate, the better your results are going to be. I would recommend against total turf removal, because you think about that root system, all the good stuff in the soil is now this deep in, not this deep like it used to be, like it's supposed to be, right? So chop your soil, chop it up fine, spread it about. You know, after seeding, consider your moisture, right? Don't let this die in a drought. Give it a little bit of nurturing. As far as mowing, we'll talk about this all throughout the presentation, but selective mowing is cutting the plants you don't want to then stimulate the ones you do. If you're a nerd like me, I love a weed whip, a brush saw. You get to walk your landscape. You get to identify all the fun, cool stuff that's happening, you know, as you're eliminating the stuff you don't want. These seedings you're going to do, any of these native gardens, they're going to be constantly evolving and changing things. So in that instance, I like to think the maintenance is really quite fun. You're watching this grow and develop as you're nurturing it, whereas maintenance in a lawn is mowing your lawn every time it rains. Aeration is recommended if that's an option available to you. That's super helpful in getting these things established. And then as far as long-term maintenance goes, once you have it set up, you're really just setting your lawn, your mower up high as you can, as high as you like, and treating it like a lawn. But it's a lawn that's got some good stuff in it. Talk about shorelines. So fish and aquatic habitat need those submergent and those emergent plants along the banks to reproduce and to feed and to find shelter. And really, like 90% of all the animal action happens right along the shore. So as we strip that away, we're eliminating that. Incorporating native plants and habitat, in my opinion, is way more attractive than this as well. This is hot, this is sterile, this is not inviting to anybody. But furthermore, you don't have to, in any of these settings we're discussing, you don't have to convert 100% of this to native wildflowers and grasses. I want you all to maintain your spots of recreation. You know, have your pathways and your steps and your docks and your gardens and your showy spaces. We're discussing how to incorporate all those things into a landscape. Talk about dragonflies specifically when talking about shores. As you may know, the dragonfly adult feed on mosquitoes very, very successfully. What you may not have known is the dragonfly larva, which is an aquatic species, it lives entirely underwater, they eat mosquito larvae. Dragonflies need to crawl up vegetative stalks to then molt, shed their shell, and become dragonflies, right? So by removing the vegetation, converting your shoreline to a sterile riprap, you are now actively destroying dragonfly habitat and promoting mosquitoes. Furthermore, you know who really like grass, turf grass, right up to the shore? Is Canada geese. They hate walking through the tall grass, and they love the turf grass. So, feel me? And in terms of traditional gardening, we can do both. We can have both. And that's what we're here today, is to talk about how to garden with native plants, what that garden's supposed to look like, what your expectations should be, what maintenance is, all that stuff. Doing these native gardens, it's no longer about the individual showpiece plants. Now it's about the collective. It's about the diversity. It's about how one plant's complementing another. It's about how the bloom times change through the season. And it's not even about the plants either. It's about the ecosystem. It's going to be about the butterflies and the bees and the birds and all the other stuff you're attracting. That's what you're gardening for. Just kind of to define some of the plants we're used to working with, gardening with, etc. Many of the plants you're most familiar with are exotics, meaning they've been introduced from Asia, Africa, other places around the world. And they're problematic when we're talking about ecosystems and that they have not co-evolved with Minnesota's wildlife. Our insects are not adapted to find nutrients from those flowers or from those stems or from those leaves. And by our insects not being able to find that nutrients, that energy is then not moving up the trophic level. You're not feeding birds and so on and so on. Now, these plants are still sequestering carbon and creating oxygen. They're still doing nice things to the soil, and they're beautiful, right? So I'm not here to make the world less pretty. I'm just trying to help you all understand what's missing by not having the native plants. Some of these, when we talk about invasive species are those that have been introduced for whatever reason that have then proliferated in Minnesota. And now we are finding them in places where they were not intentionally installed. They have adapted to our ecosystem. They're existing so successfully that they're outcompeting our native plants. When we looked at that slide with the highway system, right? And it's all invasive species. Well, 50, 60 years ago, say you let a farm field go furrow, it would get overrun by native species. Well, now it just gets overrun by invasive weeds because that's what's most prolific. And they have become so prolific because they do not have the native natural pressures like insects to keep them in check. Talking about cultivars and nativars, like Michelle mentioned with the columbine, these are plants that may be native originally, but have been selected to demonstrate certain physical traits. Some of those traits might be that they're non-spreading, say, which is wonderful for a traditional tidy garden, right? You don't want aggressive seed spreading, that sort of thing, right? Well, they are likely non-spreading because they are not producing viable seed. Not producing viable seed because they are lacking in pollen or nectar or the material that the pollinators might be looking for. Some of them have been adapted or engineered almost to have traits like different colors or double blooms or different flower shape. The pollinators that have evolved with our native plants, they are oftentimes not tuned in to even locating those plants because of the different color and the different shape. Many are adapted to be pest-free, which again is perfect for your traditional garden. But when we're talking about what's lost relative to native plants, they might have a tough cuticle on their skin or hairs or produce a toxin. They're no longer giving food to insects. And again, it's all about moving that food up the food chain, right? We're going to talk a lot about pests and how you get to rethink what a pest is when you're working with a native garden. Don't let aphids destroy your cellular daylilies, okay? But when we talk about native gardens, you get to rethink about it. So, and then local ecotype. So this is where us nerds really get into the weeds. So here we have the same species, Retivia columnifera. This is in Texas, blooming right now. And this is a picture I took of my plant yesterday. Same species, but it's on a different time frame. And why this can be concerning is if you're buying, say, a seed mix that's maybe from California or Texas or elsewhere, and even if it has the same species, they're going to be out of sync with the timeline here. What that means is if these plants bloom before the local insects are ready to locate them, they will not have served their final purpose. Us at MNL, when we talked about those remnant prairies and collecting these wild seeds, we track the local origin of everything we're producing. Some jobs, if say worked with the DNR or other places, there might be regulations like plants have to be sourced within 60 miles or 200 miles or what have you, right? I don't want all of y'all to be concerned about local ecotypes, right? I'm already trying to sell you on native plants. So just know that we are. This is something that us in the industry take very seriously. All right, talking about some common problems, maybe some things that have people resist utilizing native plants. They don't like bugs. Get over it. We need them, you benefit from them, they're super fun. 99% of them don't have like the physical mechanisms to do you any harm, okay? So if you think they're ooky, recalibrate it, they're pretty cool. Too much maintenance. More than mowing? We're going to talk about maintenance. This is a process. This is something that takes years to get it to where you'd call it mature, but the maintenance is different. Like I talked, this is, you get to watch this evolve and change in time. You get to manipulate how it evolves and changes in time. Traditional maintenance is just regular mowing. It takes a long time. Yeah, kinda. Yeah, kinda true. But again, the process, I think, is half the fun. You're spending time with your garden, you're spending time with your landscape, you're watching new plants develop in time, you're watching new organisms come. We're going to talk about the succession of species. There's things that, say you're going from a seeding, there's things you'd expect year 1, and there's things that you shouldn't expect until year 3, 4, 5. That's part of the process, and I think it's something to be enjoyed. Furthermore, you get to manipulate that timeline, right? If you incorporate plugs into your planting, you're going to see more diversity more readily. You're going to see blooms more early. If you're having issues with weeds or other things, one of the best ways you can combat that is by introducing more seed, more native plants to fight for those resources, which is kind of like a shameless upsell, but it's fun and it's true. It's too messy. People think native plantings are too messy. What are the neighbors going to think? Yada, yada. It really doesn't have to be. I got like 8 slides talking about how to make your native planting look clean and intentional and attractive, and how you can incorporate all your recreational activities along with it, how your neighbor can be impressed by what you got going on. So, some tips and tricks to landscape with natives. Clean edges. Mowing those edges, mowing along the boulevard, I would never recommend anybody have their planting go right up to the street, right up to their sidewalk, right along their house. Mow those edges. It's gonna make it look nice. It's gonna make it look intentional. It's gonna avoid that aesthetic that it's unkept. It's not unkept, it's very intentional. It's being actively maintained. Incorporating a split rail fence, so nice. I didn't have anything in here but signage. We'll talk about lawns and legumes. You know, they send you a free sign to post with your garden that says something along the lines of, this is a native habitat, right? It's to help set expectations. Mowing pathways or creating pathways through your native habitat. You don't have to take a 1/4 acre and turn it into nothing but thick wildflowers and grasses that you're not allowed to navigate. You know, have your pathways going through it. Have your pathway meander. Now you can take this small space and make it big. You know, you can cut a 1/4 mile of a walkway through a 1/4 mile of a patch of land, you know what I'm saying? Along that pathway, you get to select your favorite spots. A bench for sitting. You can incorporate some plugs and some more focal species in the spots that are more important to you. It doesn't have to be just an expansive mass, okay? Planting in clusters. So this serves a couple purposes. First, like on a biological level, our pollinators and our insects are programmed to find these clusters of wildflowers, more so than individual isolated plants. When we talked about that soil biota, these plants are all communicating with each other as well, and they're benefiting each other. They're harboring the fungi and all the other things that are going to nutrient enrich the soil and benefit one another. From an aesthetic standpoint, it just looks better. You know, you get to plan your blooms, right? If you have your spring, 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 autumn, 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 all different clumps, all different species, you're gonna have diverse color year round. Yeah, and I would totally encourage like a 50% grass mix with all your wildflowers. We'll talk more about all that too, but from an aesthetic side, that's going to help tie the whole landscape together. There's all sorts of structural and other reasons to incorporate grass in there as well that we'll keep talking about. But rain gardens, they exist to hold runoff water to prevent flooding. There's oftentimes grant programs to encourage you to install these, and it's a great opportunity to incorporate native plants. A rain garden is a setting that's going to be disturbed. It's going to experience times of flood and times of drought, and there's native plant species that are 100% adapted for that. And over here, I've got this rain garden that's got some rockscape. Include all that stuff in your designs. Include the rockscape and the hardscape, and marry those things together. And natives and non-natives can be planted together as well. In this image, we have the Russian sage, which I think lots of us think serves tons of pollinator value. And you see these native gardens in all sorts of urban settings that incorporate that Russian sage, and I'm here for it. All right, you don't got to be a purist about this. What makes a healthy garden ecosystem? We're talking different shape, color, structure, bloom times. We got lots of slides to demonstrate this, but the different shapes of flowers are built to attract different pollinators. They've co-evolved together. Even structure in the sense of the leaf and the stem and all that. When you have a mix of low-growing broadleafs with tall-growing, columnar shaped plants, they physically support each other. They gather different wavelengths of light. They're benefiting each other physically. In that, grass, absolutely grass. And native grass, this is little blue stem. It's absolutely beautiful. It's just as beautiful to me as any of these flowers. And there's tons of other very cool, very showy native grasses as well. And like we discussed, that is offering structure to these wildflowers. That's what's going to keep them standing up straight. Talking about bloom times, these species here are as listed here, and here I have it mapped out when the blooms are going to be on all these. And it's not just different bloom times, it's multiple colors during those bloom times. So again, we're not gardening with, individual showpiece plants. It's about the collection of the plants. Some common gardens you might incorporate with native plants. So say you want to attract monarch butterflies or build a rain garden. Maybe you have a shoreline you want to stabilize. Maybe you have a septic mound you want to plant, or you have a shady situation. There are tons of native plants that can be allocated to any of those combinations. And if you talk to Michelle and you say, I want to make a part shade garden or a rain garden or whatever, she'll help curate a selection for you, a kit, a setup just like this, right? So in a way, what I'm trying to say here, guys, is I don't want to overwhelm you with all the information and all the selection. You're totally allowed to say, I want a monarch garden. I want a shade garden, okay? We'll help you out. All right, talk about bugs for the next hour and a half about. All right, attract the specialists and the generalists will come. What does that even mean? So, some pollinators are not picky. Some pollinators are very picky. When we talk about generalists, we're talking about those not picky pollinators. Honeybees. You'll see honeybees on the invasive clover and the native echinacea and your hydrangea shrub, and in your garden on your cucumbers, honeybees are generalists. Some pollinators are very, very picky. Some pollinators need a single species or a single genus of plants to feed on, and without that, they can no longer exist. So by curating your selection, or having us help you curate your selection, we'll make sure that you are attracting those specialists And in doing so, you're also going to be bringing in those generalists. Some of you may know about the monarch butterfly and the milkweed relationship. Monarch caterpillars can exclusively eat milkweed. And that's a genus of plants. So that's your common milkweed, or this butterfly milkweed, the tuberosa, and there's several others, many others. But the monarch caterpillar can only eat that plant. Without that plant, the monarchs can no longer exist. Through our farming practices, we've all but eliminated milkweed, and now we realize how detrimental that is, and we're all trying very hard to bring it back. This is kind of like the poster boy for these relationships, because I'm about to give you like a half a dozen other examples. This is some footage from our greenhouse. So here we have about a bazillion monarch caterpillars. They find the milkweed, they love it, okay? When we talk about pests, this isn't a problem. This is exactly what you're trying to make happen. I promise you, these milkweeds will respond. They will return. They are adapted to be fed upon like this. That is the point. That is, when you start to see what may have looked like an infestation of insects in your garden, you've done it. You did the thing that you set out to do. This is the point. This is what a successful native planting looks like. There should be a bug on every plant. That's kind of where I'm at.
Because that's it doing its job.
Yep. And again, it's not about the individual showpiece species. It's about the collection in your garden. So, even if your milkweed gets mowed down, you don't have one, you got a dozen of them, and you've got a dozen other species existing side by side with that, right? And these monarchs, and we'll talk more about some of these other ones too, if this was in a natural setting, half of those monarchs would get eaten by birds, so it's moving the food up the trophic level. Yep. Yeah. We're going to talk a lot about pests and damage, and I think it's the funnest part of all this, because these aren't pests anymore. Now they're company, now they're neighbors, I don't know. The American painted lady. So this pussy toes, which I talked about, and I highly, highly encourage you all to introduce this into your turf. This is the host plant for these painted lady caterpillars, which will then molt and become these butterflies. If you have this, you will see those caterpillars. They're going to do a thing where they take the leaves and they bunch them up and they make a little like cocoon sort of thing almost, a little shelter. And then when they hatch out, they'll be the butterflies. And you'll probably end up seeing the damage on the plants, and you'll see some big old caterpillar poops before you even see the caterpillars. But again, this is the point. The plant can exist with them. The plant is going to come back. It's probably going to respond even before the year's over. Yellow swallowtails. This plant right here, this golden Alexander, this is the host plant for yellow swallowtail butterflies. You've seen them, you love them. If you want this butterfly to continue to exist, we need more of this plant in the world. This caterpillar, this is what they eat. Now, these caterpillars eat dill, okay? So they're like literally dill. They'll eat the dill in your garden, they'll eat your carrots, right? So, here's what I say. Plant some of this stuff too, and pull them off your garden and put them onto here. You know what I'm saying? Because we all want these yellow swallowtails to continue to exist. Skippers are super fun. Skippers are the little ones you see fluttering all about in the prairie, in the parks. And skippers, their caterpillars eat clump grasses, native clump grasses. So even the grass is a larval host plant, just as valuable as any of the wildflowers we could be talking about. The U of M, or not the U of M, the Minnesota Zoo, they have a program in which they're breeding the Dakota skipper, which is a highly, highly endangered Minnesota skipper species. And in the past, we've helped them begin their grass cultivation program so they can have a constant food source for their skippers. We've been talking through this whole talk about symbiotic relationships, the physical design of flower structures and how they pair with specific bee species or the hummingbird on the columbine. So this isn't a larval host plant, but this is another like one-to-one type scenario. If if you like hummingbirds, we need more columbine. Did I mention baby birds and caterpillars?
Not yet, because then I'll tell my story.
Okay, baby birds and caterpillars. Okay, so I'm talking about larval host plants. I'm saying if you want these butterflies to exist, you literally have to have this plant. Otherwise, no caterpillars. Well, almost all of our bird species feed caterpillars to their young. So again, without that plant, you lose the caterpillars, you lose the butterflies, you lose the birds. Pests in the garden. So here we have a whole bunch of aphids, right? The sort of things that would drive you matty if they were chewing on your tomatoes or whatever else, right? Well, look at all the organisms that are eating those aphids. When we talk about the food chain, this is going from plants to the aphid to the next level, and then so on and so on and so on, right? Here we have, if you never knew, I bet you've seen them, that's a lady beetle larva, and that's a lady beetle pupa. And ladybugs, even the larvae, just like that dragonfly, are predators through their entire life cycle. They're eating these aphids. You know, this is what I geek out on, right? Like some of the coolest little ecosystems I've ever seen is just looking at a little patch of plants that's got a little aphid infestation on it and a dozen other species all thriving off of that population. This is good. This is the point. This is what we're trying to maintain. This is what is lost in today's world. You know, you guys talk about like that windshield phenomenon, going on road trips 20 years ago, bugs all over your windshield. They're not there anymore today. Some people might say, oh, great, no more bugs. Not great, okay? These guys are part of that equation. So, this is an invasive aphid. To keep it simple, if you see the orange ones, go ahead and get rid of them. Just like there's invasive plants, there's invasive insects and other things. So anyway, these orange aphids, they kind of suck. Squish them off. You get beetles, bugs, and other friends. So here we have two species of lady beetles, soldier beetle, soldier bugs, these tussock moths. Don't tell yourself, we got to get rid of these because we want the monarchs. These are all native insects too. These are all part of the ecosystem. Half of this infestation is going to get picked off by birds and feed the chickies. You know, these milkweeds can handle this. They're adapted for it. It's part of the natural order.
Can you name those bugs so we can hear
Yeah. Both of these, there's two different names for them. I'm not sure which is which, but these are both called milkweed beetles. It's like a greater and lesser or something. I don't know. These are milkweed beetles. These are soldier bugs. These are tussock moth caterpillars. Yep. And you're gonna, you get a colony of milkweed going, you're gonna see all 5, 6 of these and the monarchs all hanging out on that one plant. Talking about specifically Lachesis stylus, Meadow Blazing Star, and monarchs. So like we talked, monarch caterpillars need milkweed, but butterflies, all the butterflies we talked about today, they like to go to a diverse range of flowers, right? Well, the monarch butterfly is obsessed with this specific species. We grow 4 different lachesis, and they'll ignore the others to come to this one. This blooms just before they do their migration down south to Mexico, and something about it, they're just like stocking up the reserves, right? I planted this one in my yard. I lived in like a little turf desert, classic suburb, never seen a single butterfly in my life in that whole place. Year 1, monarchs show up. There was never less than 3 monarchs on that one plant. That field Jill told you about, oh, that's the next slide over. Just some nice footage from our videographer, Nick. Look at him. But check this one out. So, I mean, I don't know how to put a number on how many there are, but it's insanity. They roost in the trees at night, and the branches get weighed down by them, and it's truly remarkable. Here we go, incorporating native seed in your landscape. Okay, so MNL, we've got, I don't know, 19 or something different seed mixes, and they're all designed to suit different habitats. So say an upland dry mix or a mesic mix, short, tall, pollinator wet. There's a mix for rusty patch bumblebees. There's a mix for shorelines and a mix for shady situations. There's a buckthorn replacement mix, which is really good if you're doing your buckthorn removal projects. You're gonna then seed this, and it's gonna be very rye heavy, grass heavy, and it's, again, introducing a species to then outcompete all those buckthorn seedlings. But anyway, it's just a way to say that nobody expects all you guys to be experts on all these species, all these options. You know, we're talking about the need for a diverse mix in bloom times, mix in species that attract specialists. You know, we're curating these mixes to hit all those checks for you. Talk about wildflower seed, okay? This is something you've probably all seen on the shelves at some point or other. This is kind of funny because when we were first making the promotional stuff for this event, Thomsen's marketing person used this image initially. And why wouldn't they? They Googled wildflowers, right? Well, this, I looked up this specific mix because I thought it was funny. And these are all the places that those flowers are coming from, right? So again, everything we talked about, they're not adapted to be beneficial to our local insects and everything else down the line.
Yep.
Talk about maintenance. So, and this is kind of garden and seeding both, but definitely very much on the seeding side. So you're going to want to practice selective mowing or spot spraying. And what I mean by that selective mowing, that's where you're identifying the pest plants and you're cutting them short and you're working around the things you want to maintain. And what you're doing here is, you know, plants bring in nutrients from their leaves, they then store it in their roots. So you cut it, it's going to come back. Cut it again, and eventually it's going to exasperate its nutrient source. And in doing this, now you're putting pressure on the plant that you don't want, and you're promoting the ones you do want, who are then going to have more success in competing for those limited resources, the nutrients and the water and the sunlight, and you're basically just aiding the good stuff and fighting off the bad stuff. I would recommend against hand pulling weeds, because when you're doing that, you're then pulling out all the native seed, which has been trying to root, and you're also disturbing the soil. What is a weed? We'll talk about succession species. Basically, I don't know, what's a weed? There's a million definitions. This is how I talk about weeds. It's a plant that's going to be quick to establish in a disturbed ecosystem. This is something that happens in nature. Say there's a stampede of buffalo, or a wildfire, or a flood, right? Or a tree falls, and now there's light where there didn't used to be light, right? These weeds, these early succession species, are going to be the first ones to move in. They're not going to require as much nutrients and other things. They can thrive kind of minimalistically, right? Then other plants are going to be developing under these weeds. Your perennials, for example, those are in time going to be more successful in bringing in those resources than the weeds are. And the ecosystem is going to evolve. It's going to go from early establishing annuals to perennials, someday to shrubs to trees. Tree falls and it starts all over again. You know what I mean? This is what happens in nature. This is what happens in your landscape as well. What I was trying to say with all that is when you're disturbing the soil, you're just giving the opportunity for more weeds to introduce themselves. So try not to hand weed. And enhance with plugs and seed. So fight weeds with weeds. What I'm saying here is you've got a spot where you've sprayed out all your Canada thistle or your reed canary grass, and now you have a disturbed ecosystem. Something's going to move into that, and it's probably going to be something you don't want. So fight weeds with weeds. Plant the black-eyed Susan. We'll talk about these succession species more and more, but if you've opened up a spot because you've eliminated a plant that was not desirable, introduce more seed. Black-eyed Susan seed is a great example of this. It's a weed, right? In my sense, it's a native weed. It's going to germinate and bloom and drop seed like year one, likely, in a disturbed ecosystem. It's going to fight out all the undesirable weeds from taking hold of that footprint. And in the whole maintenance process, you can keep adding more plugs. This is an upsell, but it's fun. You can. There's so much diversity. You know, you want to see something incorporated, just plug it in there. A 6-pack a year, whatever, you know. So, succession of species. Here we have that black-eyed Susan, year one. This is, you seed your property. This is the first thing that's going to exist. It's going to be a monoculture of this. And we've talked about why monocultures are not desirable, right? Well, this is like the natural stage of things. This is going to take over, and it's going to keep everything else from moving in. And under these, all this stuff is going to start to germinate. By year 2, 3, your mix is going to get to be more diverse. And it might not be till year 5 that you see the full diversity of your mix. Year 1 on a project. Year 2, it's that black-eyed Susan. Year 3, starting to see a bunch of the Retibita columnifera mixed with the black-eyed Susan. There's some anise hyssop. Year 4, even more diversity, purples with all your yellows. And I would even say that this isn't fully matured just yet. I suspect that this has not yet been burned or mowed, you know, given your setting. And afterwards, we should see even more flower diversity, and we should see 50 to 80% grass cover. Some of the grasses are the longest to establish. Talking about when to mow, when to cut, when to remove your thatch. So our native bees aren't like honeybees in that they're not forming these big colonies. They don't have these big exterior hives, right? They're individuals or maybe small colonies, and they're going to live in the stems of all your plants, especially when the stems are erect. So you're going to want to avoid mowing, cutting all this until late in the spring rather than in the autumn like you might like to. Michelle had mentioned earlier that the majority of these, it's been found, live in the bottom so many inches of these stems. So, you know, if you want to remove this just for sightly reasons, you're still welcome to cut the tops. We talked about like the life stages of the dragonfly, right? You have to have an ecosystem for the larva. You have to have the right setup for it to then cast its shell and become an adult. Well, like we all know, caterpillars have a pupa stage. So we've planted all these plants to harbor the caterpillars, and they've got all these flowers to harbor the butterflies. The pupa exists in that duff. They exist under your leaf litter, under like the garden rubbish, right? So if in maintaining our sterile turf, we're raking up and removing and composting all the leaves, we're actively removing the pupa from the equation. So again, it's another reason why when you're doing this native garden, you're not trying to have this be perfectly clean, pristine. You want that litter. And no matter how you're landscaping, I would encourage you to maintain some of your leaf litter as well. Birds in the winter. You know, we talked about insects in the winter, birds in the winter. Birds are going to be eating the berries on those native trees. I think we talked about how they dislike buckthorn berries, right? Like there's real importance to having native shrubs, for the birds especially. And a lot of our wildflowers hold these really beautiful seed heads through the winter, and they just look incredible. They're frosted over and very pretty, and that's just a buffet for birds all winter long. You know, imagine how hard it is to be a bird in Minnesota's winter.
Yes. So in the earlier session, they asked about cutting down shrubs
And now I'll get into some grant programs and some resources that are available to everybody. First off, as far as information goes, there's tons of really cool nonprofit organizations that we work really closely with. University of Minnesota Extension, Monarch joint venture. Xerxes Society, they're super cool. They're a nationwide program. They give me the most interesting bug information ever. Pollinator Friendly Alliance, lots of resources on all these sites available to everybody. DNR has lots of really interesting information, especially involving your shoreline. If any of you are shoreline owners, I definitely encourage you to check some of this out, and they'll help give you some guidance and some information and tell you some resources. Soil and water conservation districts. Every county's got one, right? I think. You know, a lot of these, you know, they'll offer free site consultation, and these are ecologists. You know, these are experts. There's a lot of funding and grant resources available for doing projects through the county as well, especially if it involves rain gardens and shorelines and that sort of thing. And then CRP program. This is where we're talking about the hedgerows of native plantings and agriculture land. This is a program to incentivize farmers to take bits of their property that are maybe unproductive and turn them into native habitat. And they're incentivized to do this on an annual basis, I believe is how it goes. And then in doing so, like we talked, they're going to promote better crop yields. And then the big one, lawns to legumes. Lawns to legumes is a program to reimburse Minnesota residents to install native habitat in their property. It's a legacy funded program through the state of Minnesota, meaning, legacy funded meaning it's not gonna go anywhere. It's hopefully here to stay forever. It's, there's something like $2 million in the pool for it this year. They're giving away $400 grants to recipients. So divide that by 2 million. A lot of people are going to get gardens out of this, right? It's a raffle program, and they give away thousands of these every year. They are now accepting applications for fall 2024 planting. Applications are up May 15th. So what that means is apply before May 15th, and you'll be notified if you're a grant recipient, and then there will be a deadline to purchase and install this material, be it plants or seed or services or what have you, before, I don't know, I think it's November within the year. Just some fun facts about what Lawns and Legumes has provided. It's funded approximately 5,000 pollinator habitats in all 87 Minnesota counties. It's created nearly 12 million square feet of high diversity residential pollinator habitat. Funded 32 pollinator pathway projects in communities throughout Minnesota. It's collecting more than 3 million cubic feet of rainwater in gardens per year. And it's sequestering more than 15,000 metric tons of carbon per year. There's, when you enroll, it's super easy to enroll. We'll show you guys too. But there's a couple of different categories you can apply for. So you could do a small native planting. So that would be, you know, a garden, whatever, 100 square feet, what have you, utilizing native plugs and potted perennials. There's trees and shrubs available through the program. Many of these are available here at Thomsen's, and it's all native trees and shrubs that have pollinator benefit. The bee lawn, like we discussed, or some of those ground covers, those are all applicable to the Lawns and Legumes grant. And then larger areas, you know, quarter acre, acre, whatever of seed mix, that's also incorporated in this program. We'll look at the site right after this, but you know, it's basically just a very simple questionnaire, mostly looking for demographics. It's a raffle program, and they're selecting based on proximity in a lot of instances, identifying areas that are most in need of pollinator gardens. And how they figure this out, I don't know, because I see them in urban settings, and I see them in rural settings, and I see them all over the place. So, and it's all then ultimately being mapped out, kind of like the Doug deal, my home park, where they're mapping out all these pollinator gardens in Minnesota, calculating the space and saying this is how much habitat we've now created. You know, like we said, if everybody gave a chunk of their property, there's more space allocated there than through all of our national parks. That's my whole presentation.